Hello and welcome to a very special day for all you Commander fans out there. We have Gavin Verhey here, and we are talking the big Commander announcement today. If you haven't already seen it, I'm not sure what rock you're living under, but welcome to the show. And we are going to talk through all of it. We're going to talk through all of the announcement today, all of the unbans, the changes to the game changers, tweaks to the bracket list, everything that was announced this morning, and also a bit on the future of Commander and all of that sort of jazz. So we're going to jump right into it. Gavin, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Gavin Verhey. I'm a principal game designer on Magic the Gathering, so I design all kinds of cards and sets, including the upcoming Final Fantasy set, which I'm very excited about. But today we're talking about Commander, which I also help lead the Commander format panel. Which is the group that we instated last year that kind of is going to give us a lot of feedback, help guide the direction of the format, and so on. So they've been amazing to work with. I want to give a big shout out at the top of this episode to the panel that did a phenomenal job talking and debating and going through everything. And if you read the articles today, we'll talk about a bunch today, Blake, but if you go in and read the articles, there's a lot there. There's a ton to read through and get into. We address all kinds of cards we didn't take action on. We talk about all kinds of game changers we chose to put on and ones we didn't choose to put on. So we went through the whole ban list and talk about our feelings around basically every card. So there's a lot there. So I really want to give a big shout out to the panel that did incredible work, just kind of digging into this and talking and coming up with a course of action. So amazing work, panel.
Yeah. All right, let's dive into the headlines. We have a lot of cards, a lot of stuff to talk about. But of course, what people are most interested in are the cards that the committee and us chose to unban. First, before we get into that, let's get into it. And then we'll talk more about it. All right, so we have Gifts Ungiven, Sway the Stars, Panoptic Mirror, Braids, Cabal Minion, and Coalition Victory, all freed from the banned list. So first, overall, Gavin, being freed from the banned list means what nowadays?
Yeah, so when we are unbanning cards in Commander, we will always be moving them to the Game Changer list. Mm-hmm. That's basically the new process we want to have, is kind of the Game Changer list as the interim between these two. Maybe some of them don't end up getting played that much and will fall off over time, right? For example, Worldfire is not a Game Changer. It's plausible to me that Sway the Stars, if it goes the same way that Worldfire did, will fall off the Game Changer list eventually. But it's a great median point, right? I talked about that when we previewed the system previously, as kind of a median point between these places. So it provides a little bit of an avenue to do that. With these unbans, we were sensitive that brackets are still relatively new, right? They've been out for about 2 months. They're still in beta. Not everyone's going to use them. And so we chose cards that we thought, even if you aren't doing bracketed play, would be pretty understandable. And you could talk about them as a table. If they show up, it's going to be reasonable for the most part. Like a great example of this to me is Braids, where no matter if you're using brackets or not, if someone has Braids in their command zone, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. You know what kind of game you're in for. So we wanted to make sure we could communicate that with what was going on here. And so, we did a lot of iteration, came to these 5 cards using a number of heuristics, like what are some nostalgic cards players really like. Gifts Ungiven is a great example of this, just like
one of my favorite cards.
One of my favorite cards too, and there's a lot of fuzzy memories. Sam Ristic Studies commented on my video already today, just gifts smiling, a smiley face, right? Just so happy to see it back. Braids is another one where yes, it can be really unfun sometimes to play against, but a lot of people love Braids. It is a very loved Magic card, and I know many people, including our own Aaron Forsyth, were happy to see this card back. We also looked at cards, like Sway the Stars is a great example of a card where it's some people, a small number of people, really enjoy this kind of effect. Most of these kind of effects don't get played. And compared to what we have today, Sway the Stars is, we unbanned Worldfire. Well, not we, the Rules Committee former unbanned Worldfire a while ago. Kind of nothing happened. A couple people played it, and the folks who really enjoyed it played it, and then most people moved on. I think Sway the Stars will be in a similar space. Panoptic Mirror is a card that is really fun when you play it fairly. I think Panoptic Mirror is a really cool, just imprint sweet stuff onto it. It kind of has 2 main issues. One is the time walks, right? You can put a time warp on it or something like that. You can go infinite really easily. And 2 is that you can just put a board sweeper on there and drag the game out forever. The second one I'm a lot less concerned about in today's day and age. There's a lot of artifact removal running around and ways to get around a board sweeper every turn. And the time warp thing is mostly addressed either by bracketed play, where we've got pretty good rules around that kind of thing, as well as just does your table like infinite combos or not, right? That's kind of the one default thing most tables talk about. And then last but not least, Coalition Victory. This is a card which there's actually a lot of debate about. You know, when I was on the show about 2 months ago when we were talking about this, I was like, yeah, Coalition Victory, you know, maybe low-hanging fruit to unban. We actually ended up talking about this card quite a bit because I think the points made were pretty valid and reasonable. Of like, every 5-color deck has a card that says if you control your commander, you win the game for 8 mana, right? And is that an okay thing to do? We talked about it for a long time. You know, people had all kinds of opinions. But ultimately, you know, there's a lot of spells in Magic that are the equivalent of if you control your commander and you cast an 8-mana spell, you're going to win the game. And this card, if you have any pinpoint removal in response, it does nothing. So we decided let's bring it off, put it on the game changers list for here. But of course, you know, we welcome all your feedback on these changes. And these are the 5 we are rolling out with right now. Now, in the article, we talk a lot about other cards we looked at, maybe ones that could come off in the future, depending on how brackets go and so on. But we wanted to hit these 5 for now and kind of see what happens, let it evolve throughout the year as, you know, people add these cards into their decks. Commander tends to move slowly, so let's see that evolve. And then next year, maybe we'll evaluate some cards again. But,
Now, one, I want us to put in the back of our head that they're on the game changer list because that isn't a small cost now, and we're going to talk more about the game changer list in a bit. But I also want to spend some time. There was a lot of discussion around Braids being a legend that is on the game changer list. Can you tell us about that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we made the game changer list, we put a handful of legends on there to start, like Yuriko and Kinnan and Urza, Turgid, some of those guys. We talked about putting, and we'll get into the game changer updates like you said in a second, but we talked about adding some more legends for this update, and kind of what we realized is before we put more legends on the list from not being on a list at all, we wanted to just do a little bit more work on our philosophy around what those are going to be, right? Because it's a very slippery slope to like, okay, well, yeah, we'll put on Najeela and Edgar and then Ur-Dragon, then Atraxa, and before you know it, it's just like all people, many favorite commanders end up on that list. So we wanted to create a better heuristic around that. We're still talking about it. My initial pitch for what that is that if a card is unfun and powerful, it can make that list, but not if it's simply powerful. So that would mean like Turgid and Grand Arbiter stay on, but Urza and Yuriko probably fall off that list. But anyway, that's not settled in stone. We're still going to be talking about it, but we added no commanders coming up to the game changer list at this time. When it comes to unbanning cards and putting them on the game changer list, we think it's really important to stick with that philosophy. So we moved Braids from the game changer list onto from the unbanned list, onto the game changer list when we made these changes. I know many folks have asked about banned as commander, and you know, is that something we'd ever talk about again? I think it's something we will certainly discuss, but there's certainly nothing we're going to announce at this time. And also, banned as commander versus only in 99 is a relevant distinction. I know there are many Loot Tree fans out there who would love for the otter to be freed. So only in the 99 is another way to potentially look at that. And I talk about that a little bit in the article. But no changes to banned as commander or that rule today. We'll be talking about that as a panel in the future for sure, though.
All right. Well, let's move on to the bracket updates because while the unbanned certainly get the headlines, this is really the meatiest change that was made today. So let's, first of all, talk. There's the updated bracket graphic. So why don't you give us an overview here?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a couple things. So first of all, one of the things we decided to do after talking about a lot of bracket feedback and looking through what a lot of folks were saying is we decided ultimately, hey, the system's still pretty new. Let's not change anything of how the bracket system works.
Not like add a 6th bracket or...
Let's not add a 6th bracket or cut a bracket or change the rules around the brackets, right? People are still learning them. It's only been a couple of months. It takes a while for this to trickle out. A lot of content creators put out content, you know, a month and a quarter ago and now being like, all right, time for brand new content. If you do that enough times, it really erodes all of your understanding of what the brackets are. So we didn't want to change anything there. What we do have here is, you know, the initial bracket, I think one of the mistakes we made when we debuted the bracket system a couple months ago, is our initial graphic did not do a great job of capturing how important intent is to the system. So nothing has changed about how brackets work in terms of the rules around them, but we did come up with an updated bracket image that you see here on the screen right here. It's all the rules that were in there previously. Nothing has changed, but it is just laid out in a way that I think puts more emphasis on the intent, which is really, really important to us. And I have a whole section in the article talking about how critical intent is. It's not about just putting your deck into a system and having it calculate whatever it is, although I'm super grateful for all the great work websites like Archidect and Moxfield have done in supporting this. Ultimately, it is up to you to kind of understand what it is, because I can and to give your deck a direction. Because I could build a deck that follow all the rules at the bottom there of core that is optimized if I really tried hard.
Yeah.
But it's up to you to be a good actor and know what kind of deck you're building for. So we worked on this. Shout out to the whole format panel team that put in a lot of work, and Rachel Weeks especially, who did an initial version of this that she put on social media a couple months ago when we announced this whole thing, that we kind of took this as inspiration to create this. But yeah, just wanted a more updated graphic out there for folks. But while we didn't want to change any of the rules around how each bracket works at this time, although we've heard a lot of feedback and we're going to be digging into that and maybe make some changes later this year, we did want to change one constant element, which is the game changers list. Right?
Yeah.
This is one of the most common things players have asked for is more game changers. When we initially debuted the game changer system, we wanted to be really, really careful with how many cards were on there because of complexity to learn, and another list of cards, and so on. We did a lot of pre-work, once again, with places like Scryfall and Architect and Moxfield to make sure they were all ready to go when it launched so it would be easy. And the resounding feedback we heard was, yeah, it's easy. Can you please put more cards on this list? So we went back, and we still are trying to be careful about putting too many cards on. I think there is an inflection point where it becomes too much. But we thought we could add a number more cards and have it be OK. So in addition to the 5 cards moving from the ban list on there, we have 18 game changers that we're adding today and 2 that we're taking off. So here is the updated game changer list. You'll notice that green has a number more cards. That was one of the big notes we got from people of like, hey, green's really powerful. Did you consider these things? Why did Worldly Tutor survive when all these other tutors didn't? Which is pretty fair. And yeah, just other updates, cards that were called out, Teferi's Protection, and so on and so forth. The art, I'm not going to go into the details of every single one of these. The article does that, has a section for every card that's added, and a huge section for every card that is not added. Well, not every card, but many cards that are popular that were not added or asked about.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, I recommend go read the article. It's pretty lengthy and digs into tons and tons of cards, as well as all the rationale here.
Yep. Now that said, we are going to do a Q&A session at the end of the show, or whenever we're kind of done through the content. We're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. If you do have specific questions about specific game changers, we're happy to talk through them. Yeah.
The other thing I want to say on this as well is there's a lot of cards were added today. 18 cards were added here, plus the 5 from the unbanned list, from the ban list moving on. So for 23 additions in total. I just want to say that's not going to be a common thing, right? I wouldn't expect to come back every 2 months and be like, there's 20 more cards for the game changer list. This is kind of us taking in that first initial bit of feedback after there was nothing, and then we created something. Then a lot of people pointed out cards that they thought should be here, debating it a lot, and making tweaks. So I would expect future tweaks to be much smaller in quantity than this announcement. But we want to kind of bring it up to speed with what many folks had been asking for. And also, while we didn't make any changes to the bracket system as the rules for each of them, one of the biggest ones was more separation between brackets 2 and 3. And just putting more game changers on the list helps create a little more of that separation, right? There's just more cards that are like, oh, well, this will automatically kick you up to be a bracket 3 deck. We're not going to go into what all the brackets mean today other than the image that we showed. But of course, that's all online and linked in the article as well if you want to go check that out.
Let's talk really quick about the 2 cards that came off the game changers list.
Yeah.
So Trouble in Pairs and Trinisphere. Those made the initial smaller list. We found that to take them off. Why? Let's start with Trouble in Pairs. Why take Trouble in Pairs?
Yeah, so let's start Trouble in Pairs. So Trouble in Pairs is probably the card that got the most feedback of like, does this really meet the game changer definition? Is this strong enough? Is this really here? Now, I do think Trouble in Pairs is a very powerful Magic card, so it wasn't just us reacting to people saying that.
Yeah.
But as we dug in, there's a lot of comparables that are not on the game changer list that are very powerful draw engines. Cards like Mystic Remora we've opted not to put on. Cards like Skull Clamp is another one that's like, this is a very powerful draw engine, it's very strong, but we did not end up putting it on. We debated back and forth on this one for a while, but ultimately ended up deciding to take it off based on both community feedback and believing that there are other strong cards in that vein that were still around. As I say in the article, we're not opposed to potentially moving it back on again if time goes on and it becomes more and more of a staple, but we did want to move it off for today. Trinisphere is a much different situation. Trinisphere is just not a super fun Magic card. I'll start there. We all recognize it is not the funnest Magic card to play against, but it was one of the only stack style pieces that we hit. There's a lot of cards that we did not hit that are in the space of Trinisphere, Sphere of Resistance, Nether Void, all kinds of stuff like that. And by bracket definitions and how important intent is, if you're playing a stacks deck that's going to lock everybody out, that is not a bracket 1 or 2 deck, right? That's not a thing that you should expect to see there. And there are some people that just wanted to play fair Trinispheres. Like, I just want stuff to be a little more expensive, which is a little annoying, but ultimately okay. So for consistency, we decided to just take Trinisphere off at this time. And that's kind of the rationale why.
Okay. All right. Are there any of the Game Changer editions that are favorites of yours?
Ooh, favorites of mine? Well, I guess one thing that's kind of interesting, perhaps, that I'll call out is we did move a number of 1-mana tutors onto this list. Gamble, Crop Rotation, Wordly Tutor were 3 of the big ones. Kind of just for consistency. I mean, a lot of people, have used these cards to make their decks more consistent, and some amount of tutoring is okay. We have, a few tutors in there on the list, but as a restriction for some of the brackets. But these are some of the most efficient ones, and moving them up so that your games at bracket 2 are just a little less, I find the same card every time, was one that was pretty important to us. And that's one that I would call out as maybe interesting. I'll say Teferi's Protection, of course, has a special place in my heart because I designed that card. So it's not a game changer now. But enough people were just like, yeah, this is like the definition of changing the game, right? You cast Teferi's Protection and you're saved, or you can like attack everyone, then cast it to make sure you're not hit the next turn. So that's one that made it that I had a hand in. So of course, I feel a little bit of a relation to that card. But I also made Trouble in Pairs, so I guess I took one of my cards off. So
there you go.
There you go.
It's good. It's good to be in charge. Next card I want to talk about, just because it's near and dear to my heart, is Humility.
Yeah.
To me, this card very much fits the definition of a game changer.
Yeah.
It literally changes the game. It makes a lot of decks just not work. But one of the things I've found interesting about this card is that I have a very hard time putting it in decks.
Yeah.
Creatures are so good these days that I don't want to hit my own creatures. And I find myself cutting this from a lot of decks. What was the discussion around Humility like?
Yeah, well, with Humility, it is a card that shuts down everyone's commander, probably, provided you're all playing creature commanders, which is kind of the core of the format. Slows things down to a crawl, on top of having a bunch of rules issues, which is not a reason why we hit it, but a lot of confusing things that can happen. And in many ways, it's kind of in line with Draneth Magistrate, which is a card that shuts down everyone's commanders,
Sure.
And so we decided to put that on here. It is not a heavily played commander card, but it is really frustrating when it comes down. And just, everyone's creatures being a 1/1 means games are going on forever. They're not ending. You can't do the things you wanted to do. So it made sense to us to kind of kick up to the game changer list here.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. I think we have, unless there's anything else you want to go through, I think we have a ton of time for Q&A.
Yeah, I'm happy to just honestly field Q&A. I'll just say a ton is in the article. Like, if you want to go read the articles, there's a ton there. I could spend time here just saying the words that are in the article to you more, but it is all there if you want to check out our reason on any cards that were banned or unbanned, and so on and so forth. But there's a ton there to dig into. Honestly, I'm pretty interested in taking all of your questions because those are the things that we can either clarify based on what was in the article, or we can dig in deeper to stuff that wasn't addressed in the article. So happy to take that now, and let's do it, Blake.
It helps me find them in chat if you tag @Magic at the start of it. I'll try to grab whatever I can, but that's going to help it stand out for me as we talk through things. So let's start with this question. Why are specific tutors taking up slots in the Game Changer list instead of letting them just be part of the bracket to few tutors distinction?
Yep, absolutely. That's something that we talked about a lot, and I think I mentioned this in the article as well, but there might, in the future, as we revise brackets, I could see some additional changes to the rules around tutors happening. We kind of said few tutors at the outset. There's been some questions as to what exactly is few, and we've clarified that a little bit. But I could imagine a world where, I'm not saying this is going to happen, just saying, for example, where we remove the tutor restriction on the brackets and just put the most efficient ones on the Game Changer list, right? Or go the other way, take tutors off the Game Changer list and are tighter with the rules on the brackets. But we didn't want to change the rules on the brackets at this time for the aforementioned reasons. So we decided let's take some things that were kind of in line with the other cards that were on there, Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor and Vampire Tutor, Imperial Seal, all that stuff. Put them on for this go around. And then if the brackets end up changing in the future, we'll reevaluate that. But these are also some best-in-class tutors, right? Like Gamble, Worldly Tutor are very, very strong at finding you the card that you want. I'll say Crop Rotation is one that I personally was a little skeptical about it when the panel proposed it to me. But then after hearing them talk about it, and one more of the reasons I'm really glad that we have this panel, because they're just like there's all these great opinions and all the people that play so much Commander, and like I play a lot of Commander, but I'm one person, so hearing everyone's perspective is great. And they're like, it's a 1-mana tutor to the battlefield that finds often one of the most important cards in your entire deck. And I'm like, strong argument for crop rotation. All right, then we started talking about the kind of cards you got and decided to put it on there. So we hit a bunch of best-in-class tutors here, but as the bracket system evolves, maybe that exactly changes. But for now, we want to just move some of those on there.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much.
All right, let's see. Chat's jumping. Let's go through. I'm getting. We've seen a lot of individual card questions about why wasn't this unbanned now. Again, you can read the article, but since we're seeing a lot of chat around some of these, talk to us about Primeval Titan.
Primeval Titan. Yeah, so Primeval Titan is an incredibly powerful Magic card. We'll start there. So when Prime Time was legal in Commander, it was admittedly a while ago, so it was a bit of a different time, but the games did quickly begin to revolve a lot around Primeval Titan. It's like, do I untap with it, or does the board start cloning it? There's all kinds of strong lands you can get that just lead to combos style stuff right away. And we think Primetime is a possible card that could maybe return in the future, depending on how the brackets go. I mentioned this in the article, depending on how widely they're adopted, how things turn out. Maybe Primetime comes back. But like I mentioned at the top of this stream, we wanted to be a little more conservative with the 5 cards that were unbanned because we don't know how well the brackets are going to be adopted long term. Or like how widely they're going to be adopted long term. I'll say that initial adoption is really good. I think I said the numbers in the article, but at MagicCon it was like 87% of people who tried them said that they helped out their games. The Magic Online adoption rates are great. They're about half of all games are using brackets right now, so really good. And I'm seeing it all the time. I was literally playing Commander last night, and I just heard people around me at tables asking about brackets. So like it's really cool to see it out there in the wild working. But we want to give it a little more time before hitting something like Primeval Titan, which can really warp some of those Commander game. So on our list for sure, there's a great write-up in the article talking about it. I do know a lot of people like the card, but it is funny. I've read through so many Reddit threads, both over the past few days and also even this morning, of like, why not Primetime? And people in the comments being like, did you play when Primetime was legal? It is a very, very powerful card.
I was there kind of deal,
and especially ramped out on turn 4 or something like that, it can be pretty warping. In the same way that it's the same way the mini that it can just change the whole game. So I will say it is a card we'll talk about more in the future. Certainly, it is a card that is on our list to discuss, that and Sylvan Primordial more, but not being taken off here. I guess one other thing, really fast, not to take a break from questions, but a thing we did not say earlier in the show, but is in the article, and I want to reiterate to folks out there too. We're unbanning these 5 cards now, and then we also committed in the article to not unbanning more or changing the ban list more this year. That was a decision that we made. Commander's been through a lot in the past 7 months. It's had a lot happening. Change of hands, a panel being formed, a lot of discussion around a lot of individual cards. We want to focus this year really on refining those brackets so we can come back next year and do any ban list updates with knowledge of how they've played out, what they're going to look like, and so on. And also just to give people a bit of a breather after what's been a pretty discussion-heavy past 6 to 7 months. So we're not going to touch the ban list again this year. When we come back next year, we'll be able to touch it. We can ban cards or unban cards or whatever we choose to do at that time. But we're not touching it this year. We're going to focus more on the bracket system for this year. And we are going to reinstate a quarterly conversations. So just like every few months, you'll be able to hear from us. They will not all be as sizable or as long as today's announcement is. We hope to just get back in the normal communication of like, hey, let's talk about what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're working on, so you can all stay abreast of what's happening. So in terms of if you're waiting for more unbans or changes or what have you, you should not expect anything until next year when it comes to that list. Game Changers will probably update more as this year goes on. I have some dates and expectations for that in the article.
Yeah. That actually is a good-ish segue into this next question, which is actually kind of a subset of questions. So I'm gonna read the question, but what I really want you to talk about is how the committee is thinking about rules changes as well. But here's the question: why, everyone's favorite otter, why is Companion still legal when it goes against the fundamental rules of 100 cards with no wish effects?
Here's the thing I'll say about Companions. I feel like Commander is kind of the one format where they worked out for us. All many players in Commander have ever wanted is a weird deck building restriction. And I love seeing people bend over backwards to make all right, everything costs 3 or more, so I can play Karuga as my commander or as my companion or whatever, even though it's +1 card in a format with card advantage everywhere, right? So I think Companions are actually turned out pretty fun for Commander in general, and I don't have any intent on changing how the companion rules work. We will discuss them as a group, certainly, and if enough people on the panel feel differently, I'm not opposed to doing it. That's my personal opinion, that I think they're pretty fun. But in the case of Lutri specifically, which is a card that I know people really like, I do think we will be talking pretty, it should certainly be a topic of discussion for the rest of the year on the panel of what we want to do about not just banned as Commander, but also in 99 only, right? Which is where Lutri could potentially live. Not saying anything is or isn't going to happen. The discussion will still have to happen at some point, on the panel to figure out what we want to do. But if something like that were to come to pass, Lutri to me is a prime candidate of like, free the otter, because it is fun. It's a cute otter. Bloom Burrows come out, so of course it's even more supercharged than it was before. So I would love to see Lutri back on the menu. Not happening here, but in the future it's something that we could certainly talk about. I'll say that like my roadmap for the panel for the rest of the year is working on brackets a lot, going back to regular communication, maybe doing some work with the Silver Border project, which was a thing that the former rules committee was talking about before we got here, and also discussing any potential rules changes like this that we would want to dig into. Not saying that any are or are not going to happen, but it's worth at least talking about some of them just to make sure we have a consensus on kind of where we want to be with some of this stuff. And that is one thing, and the fate of Companion and wishes and all that is a thing we'll be discussing. Who knows how it's going to turn out.
All right. What is few tutors? So we have few tutors listed in bracket 1 and 2. Mox is a hard limit of 3. Some guidance would be great.
Yeah, I've said before, although maybe not in an official communication, that 3 is a good line to draw, but ultimately it does come down to, once again, intent a little bit of how often you're planning on tutoring, right? If you're playing 4 tutors in your deck, but they're all 5 mana hyper-specific tutors, that's a lot different than playing 5 tutors that are the most efficient versions you could possibly play. But I would say in general, like 3 is a good line to draw there. And when we do some actual revisions of the 5 brackets and how they all look, we'll have more clear communication around that as well.
Okay. All right. With the addition of a few lands to the Game Changers list, would more lands need to go on the Game Changers list for Primeval Titan to get unbanned?
Well, at its base, Primeval Titan is just already putting you up 2 lands immediately, plus 2 more lands every turn. Now, granted, if they're all basic lands, it's a bit of a different story, but I think like putting a bunch of lands on the Game Changers list for the sake of unbanning Primeval Titan is like not the...
Juice is not worth the squeeze.
That's not the direction to go, right? People love a lot of these lands. A lot of them are not inherently problematic. I don't think we should do that just for Titan. I think the much more likely potential outcome that could happen, I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it's even likely, I want to be clear about that, but is that just as brackets become more and more adopted and people get better and better about pregame conversations, that's a thing that we could unban and just have it be acceptable, Yeah. One thing that I really think this whole thing has done with brackets is, use them or not, it has kind of elevated all the discussion around pregame discussions. I have seen more pregame discussions happen in the past 2 months than at any other time, basically, in my history playing Commander. I witnessed a great game at MagicCon Chicago where someone pulled out their deck and they were like, well, what bracket are you guys playing at? My deck is bracket 2. And someone at the table was like, I have no idea what that means, but here's what my deck is doing. And they just talked about it, right? And ultimately, that's our goal here. No matter whether you use the system or not, all I want people to be doing is have those pregame discussions. And the better folks get at doing that, and the more it's on people's minds, and the more we give you language to talk about it, like I think Game Changers has also been a really good language to talk about it. Maybe you talk about how many brackets there are, but you talk about how many Game Changers you're playing and which ones. That's just really valuable. So when we do any further evaluation next year, seeing how well the bracket system has been adopted, but also how well just those pregame conversations are going and how plentiful they are, and how the terminology has been adopted, I think we'll do a lot in informing how safe some of those cards are, right? I guess that's what I would say at this point.
All right. Let's go into... let's see. Can you speak to Birthing Pod?
Birthing Pod's a cool Magic card. Is the question about, does it count as a tutor?
Can you speak to the lack of mentioning Birthing Pod? I guess this person was looking for more discussion of Birthing Pod.
Yeah, I'll be transparent and say we did not really talk about Birthing Pod at all. I don't think it's a card that's really been, it was not on a radar as like a potential game changer. It is a repeatable tutor, so it is a card that would certainly fit under like, hey, try not to be doing too much tutoring. But it is not a card that is on our list to potentially look at for a game changer at this time. But we're very open to feedback. So if you all feel differently, happy to hear thoughts.
All right.
I'll say personally, Birthing Pod, cool Magic card. I like that card.
Has the panel considered any modification into the partner mechanic, like different commander tags, banning low-colored efficient partners like Timna or Thrasios?
Yeah, we talked about the one we talked about the most. I think is Rograk, or if that's how you say it,
zero
the name,
one,
the 0
yeah.
mana cost kobold. It's just so efficient, well, as efficient as you can get. 0 mana cost commander, and potentially putting that card on the game changer list. Something we talked about a little bit. With that said, it is the most problematic, probably in CEDH, which the game changer list doesn't really move the needle on how much it gets played. Next year, as I said, we will be open to looking into potentially banning cards. For this update, we did not want to do any bans. We've said that for months. It is plausible we could look at some partners at that time, although that is not something I would necessarily expect would happen. What I will say about the partner rules for command tax, we'll take a look at that as well. But in terms of how the partner mechanic works in general, like that's what's printed on the cards, that's what the cards do. I don't anticipate we're going to change much about how the partner mechanic works. We could look at the command tax thing, but I would say that is unlikely. So I'd expect partners to mostly continue to work as they are. I will say that in design, we're very aware of how powerful partners are. We're pretty keen to not do a lot more of them. I would not expect to see more partners other than just the occasional one-off, like a Yoshimaru or a couple other one-offs that we've done in that vein. There's one in the bird in Ixalan. I'm blanking on the name of him, but the pirate guy. Anyway, bird pirate. We might
do you feel the same about partners with?
Partners with and variants thereof, like background or something like that. Much different story for us, right? Those we can kind of figure out the combinatorics of 2 cards together or 2 cards in a limited environment. But every new individual partner we add creates so many possible combinations that it can just put a lot of pressure on the format, especially given that, I've said this before openly in videos, and I'll say it here again. The original partners in Commander 2016 were not the best balanced, right? They're 2-color partners that are often quite powerful, and it's like having more colors and an initial commander in your command zone is just really, really, really strong. So a lot of the most problematic ones, I believe, are the older ones. Although Rograk has his own issues. But I'm sure when it comes to time to talk about that kind of stuff, we'll discuss it. And if any of those should be game changers, we'll discuss that as well. With the caveat that I talked a bit earlier about what makes a legendary creature being a game changer is something that we're still discussing. And when we have a philosophy around that, that will guide if any partner should hit that list as well. So.
Speaking of legendary creatures, I'm getting a lot of questions about Emrakul.
Yes. Well, first of all, I will, not to beat a drum here, but I have a whole section about Emrakul and our thoughts on it that's in the ban list article today. The TLDR on that is Emrakul is a very impactful Magic card. It was actually a card that many people, the community was really loud about, please ban Emrakul. At the time, it was banned originally in Commander because every deck's endgame was just getting to Emrakul, right?
Yeah.
Commander games go long, a lot of decks can get to 15 mana. And it was the best in the machine to play, of course, by a wide margin, which is true of most Magic formats.
You could play it in any deck. Yep.
Every deck gets to use it, right? So there are a lot of reasons it was hit the first time. I do think Commander has evolved a decent amount since then. Now, not every game goes to 15 mana, although certainly if you're green, you can get up there. They make it a potential candidate for an unbanned in the future. It's not happening now. We'll see how brackets evolve. It is a really brutal card in a more casual game that is lower power. Mm-hmm. But maybe depending on how the bracket system goes, it could be something unbanned in the future. Obviously, I know Emrakul has many fans, so that's something that we'll look at again in the future. Not touching it right now. And I have a whole paragraph that's maybe more eloquent on that in the ban list. You can go check out if you want to go read my description of that card. But it is a card we talked about heavily. I'll say that is a card we talked about a good deal.
All right, here's 3 cards we have not talked much about and were not really talked about in the article. So were KCR, Clark Clan Ironworks, there we go, Keurig, or Dovescape considered as game changers? I see all 3 in the wild fairly often and feel they exemplify game changers.
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I think Carrick came up very briefly, but with the changes with us wanting to do more clarity around what makes a legendary game changer, we did not do Carrick at this time. One thing I want to be really careful about the game changer list is how slippery of a slope it can be to putting every card that could be unfun or could be widely played on there. Because that's not the goal here, right? Our goal is not to have a 200 card list to parse through with everything you could imagine, or even a larger list. We really still want to try and keep that list not super long. Dovescape can be frustrating when it comes down. It shuts down a lot of different kinds of cards, but both the play rates that we believe and the data that we look at, like EDHREC has, makes it seem like it's okay. And also, it is, it's a 6-mana card. It does change the game. Like, yes, it does, by literal definition, change the game. But it's not as widely played, I think, to get game changer status. We'll happy to talk about it in the future if necessary. But what I don't want to do, what I really strongly do not want to do, is keep being like, all right, we had a bunch more game changers. All right, well, now the post moves, and people are like, okay, well, what about these cards that are kind of close? And then we move the post again, and it's like, what about these cards that are kind of close? Because you do that forever, and you just end up with a multiple hundred card game changer list. Josh Lee Kwai has this great thing he calls the cousin problem too, where you add a card on. It's like, oh, what about this card that's like that card, and this card that's like that card, and this card that's like that card. I think he talked about this in one of their podcast episodes, but we've talked about it certainly some on one-on-one as well. We want to be careful about every individual card we add because it also creates all kinds of what about these cards. Mm-hmm. So that's part of why Trinisphere came off, because just like it creates a lot of questions about other cards, and why we want to be pretty careful about which cards we choose to put on. So will there be more cards added in the future? I think almost certainly we'll add a handful of cards here and there, and probably some number of cards will come off as the brackets evolve. But I don't want to do more huge additions, and I really don't want to keep moving that goalpost. I want to, at some point, get to a list that is pretty stable, hopefully by the end of this year, when we take brackets out of beta, is kind of my target for that.
All right. Let's see. This is more an interesting process question. Do you ever reach out to spell table users to get their perspective on brackets? It's one of the places where brackets and power levels are always used for every game, and we never hear much about spell table being used as a resource in feedback gathering.
I actually do have a bit about this. I think it's really cool. So Amy out there, who runs a Spellbot, which is one of the main bots used to pair people on spell table across many major Discord servers. She's been awesome. We've been in constant communication ever since brackets debuted. Actually, she reached out to me and was like, hey, we're going to start using these. Do you want some data on it? And I was like, I love data. So the adoption's been really high. It's over half of all games using Spellbot are currently using brackets. And I've got data on which brackets are used and how often they're used and whatever, the numbers on all that stuff. But so once again, that's not every game on spell table, admittedly, but it is used to pair people across a lot of major servers. So I'd say it's a pretty good analog. And seeing brackets being used at about every other game there on Magic Online is frankly an incredible adoption rate for something that's only 2 months old. So really happy with how that's turned out, and that is a bit of data there for spell table. And I quote that in the article as well. But
here's a good question to clarify something you said earlier. We talked about this last time you were on the show, but it's good to reiterate now. I know you said we won't be touching the ban list until next year, but what if there's another Nadu situation?
Well, funny you should say Nadu. I wrote something in the article I call the Nadu contingency, which is basically if there is another Nadu, if a card shows up in a set this year that is just like, we really got to get this card out of here. Or the other thing I say is if any of the cards we unban become just miserable to play against and mega popular, we will reserve the right to come back in and make a tweak. I will say it would have to be pretty extreme. That's why I call it the Nadu contingency of just like, you never want to see this card around. It is really frustrating. So I really don't anticipate that happening. But I did want to leave us the window just in case a card shows up in a future Magic set this year that we really need to hit so that you aren't stuck playing against it. And that's only for the ban list once again. We can touch the Game Changer list this year, so I think the most likely thing by far is if another card like that did show up, we would put it on the Game Changer list. But yeah, maybe there's a really extreme situation and I didn't want to cut ourselves off from it.
Yep.
And I love the name the Nadu contingency. It really speaks volumes about how I feel about Nadu. So.
All right. Don't know if this is true, but we'll read the question.
Ooh, exciting.
It's about CEDH. We haven't talked about CEDH yet. With a dire spot of CEDH and people sitting behind draw engines and trying to win at flash speed, which is an awful play pattern, was there any conversation about CEDH?
Yeah, we definitely talked about CEDH a good deal. We have several people on the panel who are pretty deep into CEDH and know it well, like Lewis Stardust, like Deco, who are CEDH players. Rebel has a lot of experience in CEDH, although that's far from the only thing they do these days. And they all weighed in from a CEDH perspective on what people thought. Obviously, like any competitive format, there's all kinds of opinions on how the format is. We know that CEDH has gotten a little mid-rangey. And people holding back, trying to do Thassa's Oracle style combos. I'll say I'm not a CDH player myself, so I can't speak to it as eloquently as Lua and Deco and some of the others can, but it is on our mind, something that we did discuss here. The note, of course, is that the widest form of Commander by a wide margin is casual kitchen table Commander. So our bans are generally going to optimize for that, but something that we can definitely talk about, bans that will impact CDH in the future, sort of like how Flash was done previously, where Flash was not a card that really saw any play at casual tables and was only really frustrating at the higher levels. It's a thing that would definitely be on the table to talk about if there were cards in that vein. So lots more discussion will happen over, if we do talk about any bans next year, but we're not touching the ban list at all at this point.
All right, here's a good question. Is Sway the Stars legal in bracket 3 decks, or does it count as mass land denial?
Sway the Stars is a very funny example because it kind of resets the game. It's in the World Fire camp, I guess I would say. I personally would tend to count it as mass land denial because it resets the game. But honestly, if you're playing Sway the Stars in your deck, I would tell it's the kind of thing that's a great pregame conversation discussion of like, hey, my deck can do some wacky stuff with cards like Sway the Stars or World Fire or whatever. But yeah, I would count that as resetting the game in a mass land denial style way.
Okay. Can game changers appear in future precons? So you've expanded the game changer list now.
Yeah.
It's more cards that could potentially appear. Can they appear in future precons?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot on the design team and how we want to handle game changers, especially with the current definitions of precon kind of being bracket 2. A few things on that. First of all, it's plausible that tying things to precons was not the best way to go for the bracket system for the initial rollout. We're not changing anything about the rules and how things are listed right now, but in the future you might see us pull away from that terminology a little bit. With that said, in general, what we in the design team are talking about is, first of all, of course, everything for the next near-term future with precons is done, right? Like Seedborn Muse is in a precon that just came out with Tarkir. We did not know we were going to put it on the game changer list when we made the Tarkir decks well over a year ago, right? So I'll start with that. But for the future, it's something that we're going to be aware of as we're designing the decks. I don't think that they're fully off the table. I talked about this previously when we discussed. I've talked about this previously in articles. It's okay for precons to have a little bit of variance there, but it does really makes a card that we're going to be talking about, right? Like if you're going to put a card that's on the game changer list in your precon, there better be a pretty strong reason why, right? Like if we were to do a spirit precon and we were looking at Seedborn Muse as like a spirit, that would make a lot of sense to go in there. That's a conversation we could have, right? Or I think I used the previous example of like, if we were to make a ninja precon, we talk about Yuriko going in there. Is a thing that we would discuss. But brackets are still evolving. They're still in beta, so I don't want our designers to do too much work on following that until things are a little more crystalline and the rules around them, the brackets are fully out of beta. So that's kind of where that's at right now.
Interesting thought starter. I think the answer to this hasn't been discussed yet, but speaking of precons, what about putting the level of the precon on the packaging? That way you can have lower power precons and higher power ones.
Yeah, I talked about that in my initial rollout article 2 months ago. I could imagine a future where that happens, and that gives us some cool differentiation between precons. Hey, this set, they're bracket 1 precons, then they're really goofy and silly and have weird themes. This set, if we were to do like another Horizon style set or whatever, hey, these are bracket 3 precons. They have some game changers in them. Like that's the thing that I talked about in the article 2 months ago. I don't want anyone to start making changes to packaging or doing anything along that lines until we see how brackets continue to go and until we see what the final bracket rules are. But I could imagine a future where if they're adopted enough, we could do something along those lines, or at the very least be like, hey, here's our new Secret Lair Commander deck, here's the bracket it sits at, or whatever. So that's all stuff that is within reason for us.
All right. There are a number of questions about bracket 4. I've heard from a few content creators that it's too wide a net for one bracket. There was another question about it being essentially off-meta CEDH decks. Any thoughts on bracket 4 specifically?
Yeah, so I'd say we've all read so much feedback about the bracket system, like so much, and talked about it so much. I'd say 2 of the biggest asks are for a bracket 2.5, something between bracket 2 and 3, and a little bit less than that, but still decently asked for, something between 3 and 4, right?
Okay.
Where 3 is like, yeah, our decks are upgraded and playing with a few game changers, and 4 is like, do whatever you want, it can be powerful, full of combos. And there's a number of people that are like, well, my decks kind of sit somewhere between where these are. Often, my recommendation for folks right now in that camp is you probably want to be playing at 3, and you should just try and get down to 3 game changers. But we are we are pretty, have heard that feedback. So as we go and revise things, that's a thing we might definitely put in there. Between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 are places that we look at the most. I also want to say that, like, I do think pre-game conversations will help you out here of like, hey, my deck's about a bracket 4. What are you guys playing? Are you guys playing fast combos? I might not enjoy that. Whatever fits your definition of 3.5. And the other thing I want to call out is I think a lot of people are like, well, my deck's not a precon, so I'm not going to play at power level 2 or at bracket level 2 here at core. 2 things about that. The first is, as I mentioned earlier, it's possible precon wasn't the best terminology for us to use here initially, and we're going to be looking at that. But with that said, I do think a lot of folks have in their heads like what precons were a decade ago, and precons are a lot different today.
They are, yeah.
Precons today, I hear stories all the time of like, yeah, the precons today hang or beat my friends in our pods that we play at home. So I would encourage you to think about what a current precon is like, which is why it says average current precon on this, and we've said that a number of times as well, because current precons are pretty strong, and I think a lot of decks folks have, they're like, well, it's not a precon level, it's a 3. But it can actually hang at a precon level, current day precon level, pretty accurately. So I would think about that as you're talking about where you are. And I think many folks are kind of thinking their decks are maybe 1 bracket higher sometimes than they should be. But with that said, we are going to look at both a 2.5 and a 3.5. And if we do that, they will not be called 2.5 and 3.5, okay? And see what we can do there. I think the other one that we have the most questions about right now is bracket 1, exhibition.
Yep.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Exhibition is something that we've heard from a number of people. They're like, I really want to have a place to play my theme deck, right?
Yeah.
Something that is really theme and less about winning. And so we made that initially. And I'd say a lot of the initial feedback we got on brackets is like, why does this exist? Not enough people have this. Is it really worth calling out individually? And for a while, we're like, well, maybe we'll just get rid of this. But kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to not make changes to the bracket system and the 5 brackets as it exists right now is because over the past 2 months, slowly we have seen more people build bracket 1 decks for exhibition, and people starting to stream their exhibition games. And there's a great, one of our members, Itsuyu, who's in Japan, at his store Haruyuya, they started running like a bracket 1 event where everyone, 30 plus players all brought their bracket 1 decks to go play, and it looked really fun. So Commander moves slow. It takes time to build decks, assemble cards, get everything you want to do. And we didn't want to cut the legs off for exhibition and that bracket to thrive before it got the opportunity to. So look, if later in the year it's still not heavily played, not if people are doing it, whatever, maybe we will change that and kind of rejigger how the brackets work. But let's give it time to see how that turns out, as opposed to giving it a month and a half of a format where it takes time to build up your Commander decks and cutting it off at the pass. I've also heard about a number of folks being like, I wish there were 6 brackets so that there wasn't a middle everyone could gravitate toward, right? Mm-hmm. I know that's something Ivan mentioned all the way back in September, October when we initially started talking about anything like this. And that's something that we're taking into account as well. So we will have some larger bracket revisions, I think, later in the year. But we really wanted to give it just time to let this continue to percolate out, let people try things out. And some things will be us having to adopt the bracket system to meet what people are asking for. But I think some number of things will just be it taking time for folks to slowly adopt to the bracket system. So let's try and meet in the middle somewhere and give it more time to evolve there.
All right. Also, I've seen a number of questions about the number of game changers. So it's been, it's 0, 0, 3, any.
Yep.
Has there been any, so like one of the question, was there ever any discussion about each bracket allowing up to that many game changers, etc.?
Yeah, I touch on this in a way in the article. I'll say the most common bit of feedback we've gotten in this is like, hey, let us play 1 game changer at bracket 1 and 2, right? And then usually that's followed with make Soul Ring a game changer and let every deck have 1 game changer is kind of the example a lot of folks use. One thing I think is really important is to preserve a space where if you don't want to play against cards on the game changers list, there's this place for you, and that's not a lie, right? Yeah. It is, a lot of people don't want to play against Rhystic Study, they don't want to play against Smothering Tithe, and being like, well, everyone can include one of these, just means that you're going to get even more frustrated when that person does draw their 1 Rhystic Study and play it down, and you have to fight through it. So I think that having brackets where there are no game changers is really important. Now, will that number stay the same forever? will as we move some of the stuff around with the brackets maybe in the future, could there be different numbers attached to them? I could imagine that. Personally, I find the system of like none in these, some in this one, all in these, just a little more clean and understandable than like this one gets 2 and this one gets 4 and this one gets 6, because it's, it is somewhat scientific. Like actually, we got some data from the folks at EDHREC that showed that, believe it or not, in the first rollout of this, the average number of game changers is about 3 in some of the higher end Commander decks. So it was like a really nice thing for us to point to. Of course, there are more game changers now, so maybe that's a little different. So it is a little bit of science in there, but ultimately it is a bit about feel. So I could imagine us changing those numbers in the future, but I would not having each bracket have different numbers of game changers. I mean, like this one has 0, this one has 4, and this one has 6, and this one has 8. Maybe that's the way we could go, but I'd prefer to not go that way if we can avoid it. With that said, that's my personal opinion. That's something that the panel and us will have to all talk about as we continue to evolve them.
All right.
Hopefully, that was long and meandering. Hopefully, that answered your question there in chat.
All right. You mentioned it offhand earlier, but we have gotten a number of questions about the Silver Border project.
Yeah. Silver Border project is something that we're still very much aware of. It is on the list to be talked about as this year goes along. When you think about the format panel, there are kind of major milestones and discussions I wanted us to be able to hit. And make sure we have the thorough discussions we need on all this stuff is really important without pulling focus too many other places. So some major milestones were rolling out the bracket system, doing the first bracket system updates, and getting to the unbans, which were something that we said we would do all the way back last year in October. Now that we're through those things and we're able to say, hey, we're not going to touch the ban list until next year, it gives us some more time and flexibility to dig into not just bracket system level improvements, but other projects like the Silver Border project, like talking about any potential rules changes, all that kind of stuff. I do want to say in general, one thing I don't want to do is like make a ton of changes to Commander, because the format is super popular, super successful, and so changing the core rules of the format is not something to be taken lightly. Will we end up talking or changing any of these? Yeah, it could very well happen. But we want to do it very carefully and with enough discussion. When it comes to things like, I know a popular one is hybrid mana or wishes or companions, like we'll talk about all those things. There's going to be a high burden of proof on actually executing on them. And when it comes to the Silver Border project, which is something that the Rules Committee started, we have all the work that was done on that, and we'll dig back into that and decide if we want to do anything there. I think over the course of this year is probably my guess. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm seeing a number of questions about topics that are not this. All good questions, but we're talking about Commander today, so I don't have any news on any of the other topics that people are asking about. Not that they're bad questions. They're just kind of outside the scope of this show.
I'm sure there'll be a show next week, right?
There's shows every week.
Ask them that.
Most every week. All right. Is there specific feedback you are looking for on the bracket system?
I mean, we welcome all feedback, and I guess now is a great time to shout out. Great places to give us your feedback are, of course, on social media. You can also post in the replies to my video today that I put up, but also specifically the official Magic the Gathering Discord has a place for collecting feedback on these changes and the bracket system in general. And we have our community managers in there monitoring it and sending reports to us on the panel. So if you want to deliver feedback, that is a great place to put it. So I really recommend the official Magic Discord as a place to put that stuff. In terms of what feedback is useful, really welcome all feedback, but some key things to think about are are you finding any issues with the brackets in terms of like, my decks don't fit into the brackets, or my playgroup has this kind of disconnect with how the brackets are working. Specific feedback on game changers is really great. If you have any that you think should be on there or should not be on there, that's really wonderful to capture. Those are kind of two big things that I think you could provide feedback on. But ultimately, we're open to all feedback and it'll all get captured and sent over to us. So please feel free to share whatever you're feeling there. I know over the past few months, I've gotten so much great feedback. And when I say like we've all poured over it, we really, really have. And while I simply cannot reply to everything because the pure volume has been gigantic, I know that it's getting read. And thank you very much for sending it in.
All right. I will ask about it. You did cover it in the article, but the 3 cards, Mana Crypt, Lotus, and Dockside, that got banned a little bit ago, they stayed banned. You talked about it in the article, but I am getting questions like, can you expand on it at all on what you wrote in the article?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say exactly what you said, which is I have a whole section of the article talking about these cards. We knew that not addressing them would be like plugging areas to the elephant in the room, right? So we wanted to talk about them. Just like everything else when we talked about the bans, they were on the table as cards we could discuss. Nothing was prohibiting us from talking about them or potentially taking them off. But basically opinions range from I enjoy Commander more without these cards. That's what I've come to learn. Even if I didn't enjoy the bans originally, now that I've played Commander for several months like this, I enjoy not having them there. All the way to just like it's too early to talk about these cards, or let's see how brackets continue to evolve before we make any decisions about these cards. So kind of general consensus was let's not touch these at this point. I'll also say of the 3 cards, I'd say if the one with the most momentum, even that was not even where we were close to a majority of people, but the one with the most momentum and the one I think is maybe the most likely that could come off at some point in the future is Jeweled Lotus. Just like it is a Black Lotus analog. It helps out high mana cost commanders. It is only really legal in Commander. There is that one weird legacy deck, I know, but I'm ignoring what Double and Cube can do. So that is one that I think has the highest chance, but even then it's not me saying it will come back or us saying these will ever return. So we'll discuss it more as it gets into next year. I'm sure when we talk about opening up the ban list again for changes, those cards will of course come up. But we did talk about them a lot. Like obviously these were on people's minds, but we elected to not take them off at this time. So hopefully that answers your question, and I encourage you to go read the article for more. The other thing I'll say on it is I know there's a lot of people on all sides here, right? There's people who are like, I love these cards, I love playing with them, I really want them unbanned. There are people who are like, I haven't been enjoying Commander without these cards, you should not ban them, or you should not unban them. So we knew whatever path we took, some number of people would be like, I want my thing back to play with, or I'm upset or whatever. So hopefully, the fact that we were being transparent and giving you our rationale helps out there some. But ultimately, we know they're beloved cards, and a lot of people like them, and we know that they're cards a lot of people are happy are not in the format, and those 2 things will always fight against each other. So thanks for your understanding, and I encourage you to go read the article for more on that.
All right. We've got time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. I'm going to read this one because I haven't gotten my 1 reference in yet this show. Do you think you'll make some game changers worth more, similar to Canadian Highlander?
It was discussed initially, but I think the answer is going to be no on that. I think it is far more likely that we would give different brackets, different numbers of game changers, which, as I said earlier, is already a thing I'm not mega keen on, than do that. Simply because it is a lot to get granular on and a lot to keep updated. And like thinking about the current game changer list, trying to figure out how I would point all those cards and what heuristics you want to use, it's going to get really granular. And I think a little too confusing. It's already an additional list of cards to track. So really, my goal here, and I think the goal of many folks on the panel, is one list that you can track and just keep an eye on. Now, does that mean that the same weight is given to Seedborn Muse as it is Demonic Tutor, and is that correct? Well, yeah, they are different. They are little different power levels of cards, but they still fit in within the category of game changer. And I don't want to get mega granular on that. I think that will lead to even more discussions and problems down the road. So I would not anticipate that. Although, of course, we did look at Canadian Highlander as a basis for a system because it's a cool format and there's a lot of good stuff going there. It's just a lot harder when it's not a competitive format, right?
Yep.
So.
All right, we are just about out of time. I do want to give you the chance, Gavin, to reiterate what's coming up. When should people expect future communications, actions, that sort of stuff? Absolutely.
So at the top, I'll say, and I've said this many times now, but I'll say it again, no further bans or unbans this year. We're not going to touch the ban list for the rest of the year. Next year, we'll be able to come back to it and do kind of whatever we feel we want to do at that time, and not only at a once-a-year interval. I don't want to set up an expectation like standard. It's only going to be a once-a-year thing. But we're not going to touch it for the rest of this year. We are going to go back to quarterly communications with you all that are not always as lengthy and as meaty as this one. They're just like, hey, checking in. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're talking about. Here's what we're thinking about. Just to keep that communication good and open, and also to help broadcast and forecast things we're thinking about. So if there are changes made in the future, you're not surprised about them. We're not going to be making any more changes to the Game Changers list, certainly, or brackets until sometime after MagicCon Las Vegas. So for the next little while, this is stable. And I think I said our next communication, I think I might have said late June, early July. Is that what I said? I can't remember in the article, but
it's in there.
It's in there. It's in the article somewhere of when I would expect to hear from us next. So we're hoping to keep plenty in touch with all of you, make regular communications, no unbans or bans for the rest of this year. And I guess the last thing I'll kind of end on is a thing that's been reiterated to me so many times is Commander moves slow, right? It's not like a competitive format where the meta is changing all the time. or stuff needs to have format health constantly. Commander moves really slow, takes a long time to adopt. So I would much rather us move slow on this stuff, make changes, see how they're received, go back and iterate, than do anything too quickly. And with these 5 unbans today, 5 unbans for Commander is a lot. Like, if you look at the history of Commander, 5 unbans in a single day is like titanic. So let's see how these 5 go, how they're adopted over the course of the year, how quickly they make it into decks, what reactions are as folks actually get to play with them. And that will also inform us a lot as to what we might want to do in the future. But for now, I think it's quite a bit, and I don't know. I'm ready to go cast some gifts on Gavin, Blake. I don't know about you, but it's
I've got them lined up. I got to figure out what decks they go in. All my blue ones, I guess, probably. All right, that's all for this week. Next week we're going to be back. So for all of you who had random questions, next week I am probably just going to be hanging out, probably playing some Arena and just answering questions. So if you have more questions that we didn't get to today that weren't about Commander, or if they are about Commander, sure, why not? We'll be just kind of hanging out next week. The week after that, Weekly MTG will be taking a break because if I remember things my calendar correctly, that is the week that we head to PAX East to debut Final Fantasy.
I'll be there.
Yep. Gavin will be at PAX East. So next week we're going to hang out, answer what questions we can off the top of my head. And then the week after that, no show on Tuesday, but we'll have the big debut at PAX East. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.